Hi, I'm Paul. I'm a scholar of religion and a retired minister. I struggle with doubt. Maybe we can help each other. Last time we talked about how love was the theme of the Bible. And I've talked about how the important thing about the Bible isn't so much taking all the stories literally, but looking at what they say about love and then looking in our own lives to see if we see a special kind of love in our lives. But why is love such a big deal? Why is the Bible, all these different wild stories, some of them in the Bible, so obsessed with love? What does love imply? I've thought about this a lot through the years. And I went to school and I studied, theology and all that stuff for years. And all that's very valuable. You can learn a great deal from it. But I really think that as far as it relates to our practical spiritual lives and how we treat other people and how we deal with the problems we face every day, it really boils down to a much more simple thing. And what's interesting is I think all these different stories in the Bible and how they say a little something different maybe about love are pointing to the same thing. I think love implies, and this is what I gather from my reading of the Bible and just from living, I think love implies just a few things. It implies, first of all, if you receive an act of unconditional love, whoever gives you that love is saying you are of value. You matter. And they're saying we want to share the joy of love or the beauty of love with you. You ought to have that. And that says something really special about really everybody, because the Bible in the stories about Jesus teaches that Jesus loved everybody and Jesus died for everybody. And so that means that it's claiming that in God's eyes, everybody has a really, really particular and unique value. And there's a sense in that regard that every life says something special about God, since God is love, according to the Bible. And so recognizing that we are of value, man, when we're struggling and we're dealing with depression, dealing with doubt, wondering if our lives mean anything at all, to be reminded of that message that we are of value, that means a lot. But it also says, I think, that love implies that we are of value, but it also implies, once we recognize that we ought to treat other people as if they were of value too. We ought to share the love we've been given, the unconditional love, with others. And that means we see value in others' lives. But more than this, we ought to see value in others' lives. We ought to love other people. There's something about unconditional love that isn't just a gift, but it's saying that it is the way life ought to be. It is the way we ought to act toward others. Now, Lord knows we don't always do that. We mess up a whole bunch, and I've messed up as much as anybody, if not more. But we ought to do that. We ought to. Love is the way life ought to be. And when you say ought, there's an implication there that there is something unconditional about it, an unconditional element. And when you start using words like unconditional, the word eternal comes in as well. There is an element of love that invites us to say and to believe that love is the ultimate good, that love is the ultimate, that love is God, as 1 John chapter 4 says. And that means that we are of value, that other people are of value, and that life is of value. It's worth living. All that, I think, is contained in every act of unconditional love that we give to someone else or that receive. And I think that really is what the Bible is trying to say in all of its different stories. And scriptures from other traditions, I think, are trying to say that as well. And to me, that's been the most practical thing I've learned from religion, is is that life is about love, and that love itself gives us some invitations and some promises. The invitations are that love is God, that love is beyond the limitations and the problems of this world, and that somehow love will be with us as we walk through these promises. And love also implies, I think, that things are going to work out. Even if things look awful black and awful dark, things will work out. When we accept love's call and take the risk, and there's a risk. You know, one of my favorite teachers, Hans Kuhn, says there's a risk in having faith in love. We can't prove that love is divine. We can't prove that things are going to work out okay in the end through love. But if we trust in what love implies, what love calls us to consider, it gives us a peace in our hearts that gives us more strength than we would have otherwise. And I think also changes the way we look at things a little bit, so that if we reason about our life and ourselves in light of love, life can make more sense, a little more sense than it does if everything is just arbitrary. Some people would say that love is just the neurons in our brains, and that love is nothing beyond just what we would arbitrarily prefer to do in any given moment. And there's a lot of reasons to argue for that. I don't believe that. I think that if we take the risk to trust in what love implies, that we are of value, and that there's something greater that's calling us to take love's hand, hold on to it, and that it will walk with us through our suffering and eventually carry us through. If we do that, we have a peace that gives us strength, and we can see how to reason a little more clearly in this world. Well, you may disagree. You may think love is just the neurons functioning and firing in our brains. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Let's talk about it together. Maybe together we can help each other. God bless you all.